So I'd like to welcome all of you to Our Lady of Fatima Parish Centre this evening. Thank you for coming out on this dark October evening. And as well as welcoming those who are physically here in the hall, we'd like to welcome all of those, the many hundreds and the many thousands of people we hope in the coming weeks and months who will be experiencing this talk through the wonders of technology. I'd like to welcome on behalf of everyone here, Raffaella. Raffaella changed my life in a small way earlier this year when she shared with me something of what she's going to share with all of us this evening. And she just made me think about the impact of something I hadn't thought about before, which is the bank that I bank with. When we think about our carbon footprint, we think obviously about the normal things, about the way we travel, the things we eat, the things we buy. But we don't naturally think about the way we use our money. And Raffaella opened my eyes to that. So it's brilliant that you're able to come and share with us a kind of an expanded form of the knowledge which you have gained. So thank you very much, Raffaella. Welcome.
Right, so yes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to make your money count when it comes to the climate and ecological emergency. I am a geography teacher, and I'm also a campaigner with a group called Money Rebellion. And we campaign on the banks in the city to try and get them to invest their money more wisely than they do. We haven't been hugely successful. Okay, so before we start, I just want to put this into context here. This is a graph that everyone should know. It is simply, it's the temperature, and the temperature, as we know, is being caused by human activity. You can see humans have been around for that amount of time. That was the Industrial Revolution. We're now at 1.1 degrees centigrade. Actually, they've just reassessed. We're higher than that. If we don't change, by the end of this century, we're going to be at 4 degrees centigrade. And that is a huge amount. It's incredibly, it's very worrying. And it can feel very unempowering for us to be at that temperature, knowing that we're heading to that temperature and we can't do something about it. We have very little control over the government policy and what the banks do and various other things, but we do have an influence. And we have an influence in 4 different ways, and these are the 4 things that we must all be trying to do. One is thinking about our travel, how we travel to places as our own individuality. We've got to think about how we eat. You know, trying to eat less meat, trying to eat a lot more locally sourced food, and just trying to think about our diets and how that relates to the environment. The third really important thing we need to do, which I'm going to talk about today, is manage your money wisely. And then the 4th thing is just talk about it. Talk to other people, share experiences, and look out for each other, because it's an emotional subject, and we need to be really caring for each other. With that last one as well, maybe you can join a campaign or a group, you can set something up locally. So, money. I need to tell you a little bit about how money works before we move into it. So for any company, they all need finance and insurance to build any infrastructure. So they need money. Without money or without insurance, they can't go ahead. Now that can be a wind farm. It could be an oil rig. Vertical farming, that's Heathrow Airport expansion. That's the RWE coal mine in Germany, and here HS2. Now, the fact is that they get their finance from the banks. Most of their finance comes from places like the banks. The banks get their money from us. So it's our money. We may not realize our money could be going into wind farms, but our money could be going into an expansion of Heathrow Airport. And we don't know. Actually, we do know with RWE, because anyone who banks with HSBC, your money is going into a massive coal expansion taking place at the moment in Germany. So, when we think about our money, so that was looking at the bigger picture. Now looking at ourselves, we have our money in a current account, savings account, investment account. We also think our money is involved in mortgages, if you have one, and also our pension. I'm just going to look at the current account and savings account today. So, a group called My Mother Tree, they are a charitable organisation. And what they did was that they took all the big banks and they took all the carbon footprint of the big banks. So they found out exactly how they invested their money and they worked out the carbon footprint of them. They then divided that amongst all the people that had money in the account. And they worked out here that for each £5,677 held in a current or savings account for a high street bank like Barclays or HSBC, and that's about the average that people in the UK have, the levels of CO2, carbon dioxide, produced per year could be more than flying from London in the UK to Rome and back 7 times. So having that amount of money in the account is the equivalent to 14 flights, 14 European flights. And a European flight is huge. That doesn't mean that if you change your bank account, you can then hop on a plane and go anywhere for free. But so what they said is if enough of us take our money out of fossil fuel investing banks, we undermine their investment strategy. So they won't have the money to put into these projects. And it means that then it's likely to reduce. I don't know how much you know about things like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and COP, but all of them, all the scientists have said as a bare minimum, a complete red line is no new fossil fuel projects. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening. These banks are still financing it. So I want to I've given you all a copy from the Ethical Consumer, which is my little banking Bible. What I've done is I've printed off a page. And what the Ethical Consumer did is that they're the ones that have ranked all the banks. And they looked at the banks on the basis of 5 different things. They looked at them based on their fossil fuel finance. And just to give you an idea of the fossil fuel finance, since Paris in 2016, commercial banks have pumped over 5.5 trillion into the fossil fuel industry, which is a huge amount. That is since we've known that we've got to stop, they've put 5.5 trillion in. The next thing they looked at is they looked at the banks funding of deforestation and therefore the pandemic risk. As forests are cut down, we're going into areas, we're coming across more species that we don't have immunity to, and that is increasing massively our risk of pandemics. They looked at their policies on human rights and animal rights. I mean, certainly which countries they're investing in, for example. And they looked at directors' pay and tax avoidance, and finally funding the arms trade. So they looked at those 5 things, and based on those 5 things, they rated them. They rated on the choice of where they invested their money, and also the ethical policies a bank has in place to prevent the financing of harmful practices. So based on that, that's a ranking of the sheet that I've given you. And there you go, there's a rank. So the way that it works, just to kind of go through this again, is you open a current account or a saving account with a traditional bank, and your money is held there. Your money then endorses a bank's investment, and for most banks, that is the fossil fuels. Fossil fuel development generates carbon emissions, taking us closer towards an uninhabitable world. So the question is, why do you find all the high street banks at the bottom, and you'll find more of the building societies at the top? And that will become even more apparent when you look at savings. And there's one fundamental difference between a bank and a building society. And that is that banks are owned by shareholders. And shareholders need a dividend every year. That's what they want to get out of a bank. They invest in a bank and they get their dividend, their money back every year. Now, a shareholder has a right that if they don't get a dividend that they like, if it's not big enough, they can sue the bank and say that we don't think you're doing a good enough job because you're not giving us enough money. So banks are under they're under pressure to make sure that their shareholders get a good rate of return. And they get the best rate of return from investing in the more high polluting projects. A building society is owned by the people that have an account there. So if you've got a mortgage in a building society, you own part of that building society. If you've got a current account, a savings account, you're part of that building society. So a building society doesn't have to get a dividend for the people that own it, because they just have to operate like an ordinary bank otherwise. You'll find that in the past, one of the reasons why our generation tends not to have a building society is because they tended to only have very limited services. But you now find that a bank like Nationwide does everything that a high street bank does. And you can get transfers from abroad and everything else. So, looking at that, the next thing, I just want to take you into an area that drives us mad, and that's this concept of greenwash. Greenwash is where you say something and you're hiding the truth. And I'll bring up the example of HSBC, because last year they were caught out for two huge howlers. The first one was that they put an advert out, and the advert said that, aren't we great? We're doing so much for the planet. And the Advertising Standards Agency looked at their statistics, and they looked at what they were doing, and looked at the advert and said, no, you can't have that. So they had to take every single advert down. So that's one thing. You've got to be really careful when you see an organization that says, we're doing incredibly well. Just be careful, read between the lines. And another example is with HSBC, is they came out with an announcement, as did Lloyds, and a few others have followed, saying, we're not going to fund any new fossil fuel extraction project. We're not going to fund any new oil rig or any new field or any new coal mine or any new gas project. And that's basically what all the science has said, don't do it. But the devil is in the detail here, because what HSBC can do is they can finance the company that are doing the new project, and that releases. So if you give core money to, an example being here is Equinor. Equinor is a Norwegian oil company, and they own the Rosebank company, because the government have approved a license for it, which has been a little bit of a surprise for us to have done that. But Equinor own it. Now, HSBC finance Equinor. So essentially, if they give them more money, they're essentially allowing Equinor to release their core funding to go and open up the new oil field. So again, they may not be directly financing it, but they are indirectly doing it. So here, just to go back, I'd like to just quickly talk a little bit about the data, because I've come out with some quite sweeping statements. And there's one of the organizations we rely on is this group called, this report called Banking on Climate Chaos. It comes out every year. And it does two things. It shows you the data of each bank year on year. And the other thing it does is it tells you what each bank is investing in. And I'll just show you a couple of examples of this. Oh, and then, and another thing it does is it talks about some individual projects. For example, there's a Mozambique offshore project. There's other specific, really huge projects that are being financed that shouldn't be going ahead. So here, this gives you an example, and it shows you all the worst banks, and it goes right the way down, but I only pulled out the top one. You can see here, the top one here is JP Morgan. They've actually been pipped this year, recently, by the Royal Bank of Canada, that are now the worst bank in the world for financing the climate chaos. So the Royal Bank of Canada have shot up despite all the fires in Canada taking place. You'll see down here, you've got Barclays about 7th down. They are the worst bank in Europe. They're the worst bank for financing fossil fuels in Europe. you've got then in between that bank BNP Paribas and then HSBC, which are the second worst bank in Europe for financing fossil fuels. And it goes down. It shows you year on year how much they're financing. Then so that's the overall picture. And then I just thought I'd take the top of Barclays as a bit, because I want to just show you one thing that's happened. If you take Barclays and look them up, they then list all the fossil fuel companies that they finance. And it goes on for pages. There's a long, long list. And it shows you how much they give them each year. Now, the one that's really interesting to look at is 2022, where they have given some money, but they've given a lot less. And right the way across the board, fossil fuel companies have asked for a lot less from banks, even though their emissions have been going up, even though they've been pulling out more and more coal, oil and gas. And the simple reason being that they made so much cash from the price being high, from us having to pay for it. They made so much money that they then didn't need to ask the banks for any. So that is the reason why in 2022, people haven't put money into fossil fuel. The banks haven't been financing much fossil fuels. If they ever make the claim that it's gone down because they've got better policies, that is not true. It's gone up again. So here, moving on, I just want to talk a little bit about savings and investments, just partly because you've got here all the building societies at the top. I haven't printed this page off. And then here, right at the bottom, you've got all the banks again. And one of the things I just want to pull out very briefly from that is that talking again about the fact that building societies don't need to make a huge amount of money for their shareholders. What building societies do is they lend out a lot of money to mortgages. They lend out the money that are savings, they then pay and give people for mortgages. They get the money back from the mortgages, and they give that back to the savers. It's a really simple two-way thing. They don't have any of this investment. They don't have any of the really complicated buying in advance and guessing and guessing what the interest rate is going to be and all this speculation. It's a really simple thing. And that is the reason why they are so, they're so high up in the environmental rating. So when it comes to our investments, one thing that I also want to just point out is you've got to be really careful of the greenwashing in language. So we talked about the papers with HSBC, but I just want to mention to do with what investments call themselves. So you've got here, the second one down is BlackRock Global Funds. And they say that they're a sustainable energy fund. And yet they are the ones that are putting most money into what's called the RWE, that massive coal mine in Germany. They're putting their money into it. So when they talk about a sustainable fund, you've got to be a little bit careful. And from that, I just want to bring up this. This is Vanguard's sustainable fund, where they can't put any money into controversial weapons, but they can put a lot of money into other weapons. So, you know, you could be, if you've got money in that fund, you could actually be financing a war. They also means that, you know, if you can finance a company, you can technically finance a fossil fuel company that does oil and gas as long as the thermal coal is under 10%. Now that is seen as a sustainable investment, which is, there's a lot of greenwash there. So you've got to be really careful. If you are going to invest in things, try and look underneath. All the information is on the websites. You just have to need to take a look. So, I've talked to you a bit about the banks versus the building societies and the fact that when we put our money in a bank, we don't know what we're financing. We do know what the banks are financing, and therefore we can kind of make the assumption that we're financing that. So therefore you may, you know, one of the things you can do is move your money. And it's really powerful. It sends a really clear message to the banks that you're not happy with it. And the really good example of this that we spoke about earlier is apartheid in South Africa. Barclays were financing it in around about 1987. And there was a mass campaign across all the universities not to get a Barclays account. So none of my generation have a Barclays account. But the other thing that happened was up in Norwich at the university, the students decided that they were going to do their own campaign. And they said to their landlord, we'll pay you our rent, but we'll only pay the rent if you change your bank account from Barclays. So all of the landlords that had a Barclays account changed their bank account. Now, pressure from that eventually meant that Barclays, they pulled out of South Africa. So it's a really important message that you're sending to people. The other thing from that is, as well, is it gets the staff involved. Because if the staff know that you're not happy or you're changing your account, then what happens is that they then send that message within the account to their managers. The second thing is it's really important that banks, they're trapped in this, they have to make this money, but it's actually within their interest not to invest in fossil fuels. It is going to be, when at some point they're going to be ending up with all these investments in their accounts that are what we call stranded assets. So ones that a coal mine that is now completely illegal to use, and so it becomes worthless, etc. So it's going to be within their interest to do it. Nationwide, they currently have an offer that if you want to join them, they'll pay you £200. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I get driven totally mad when I phone anything up and they say, press 1 if you want this, press 2 if you want that, and then I never know which one, and then I go round and round in circles, and eventually you end up with someone after a long time to talk to. But with the Nationwide, I just hop along to the Shepherd's Bush Green. There's rarely a queue in there, and they are totally delightful, and you get people to talk to. So I can really recommend it highly. There are ones like the Cooperative Bank that are mainly online, and they have their own benefits and drawbacks. The other thing is, the really good thing about having an ethical bank account is you can go in and if you're saying, shall I buy a round of drinks, you can pull out your Nationwide card with complete kind of smugness that you're not causing any damage. So what you can do, you can change your bank account. When you change your bank account, write to your bank manager, explain to them why you're doing it. Say, your staff are totally delightful. I've had no problem with that. I just cannot deal with the fact that I don't know where my money is going. And I know that you're financing the climate crisis. The other thing you can do is just talk to people. We talked about it earlier. Get the message out and just say if we can move this, if we can get this into a really big movement, then we can actually make a massive difference, as happened with Barclays and apartheid. And then also you can get involved in some of the things that we do. We have a lot of fun. What we do is that we go out and we actively try and get banks to change their ways. And for example, another thing you can do is write a Google review. So this is an example of something that we do where there's a sticker on the Barclays Bank saying something like, Barclays Bank, the largest financer in Europe of fossil fuels. And underneath it says here from Google review, congratulations, your photos just reached a new milestone. Collectively, they've now been viewed over 150,000 times, helping lots of people get the information that they need. So now 150,000 people that have viewed that photo on a Google review now know that Barclays is the largest financer of fossil fuels in Europe. So, let's go on to this. So, where can you go for more information? There are 3 organisations, switchit.green, Make My Money Matter, and My Mother Tree. This is switchit.green. It's a really nice, simple website to navigate. They can tell you a lot more information. They can give you a lot of backup on that. The next one is, this is Make My Money Matter. Again, you can click on the Act Now button and they'll take you through everything. It's made incredibly easy. When you change your bank account, they do all the work for you. All of your direct debits naturally transfer across. I think you might have to tell if people pay you. I think there are some people that there are some accounts that some payments that you have to change. But in the main, you press a button, and all the money that you normally pay to your TV, gas, whatever, it just naturally transfers across. It has been made incredibly easy. And then, so this is a third one, which is my mother tree. And they're the ones that I've quoted, and they're the ones that have done a lot of the calculations on the banking. And that's it. This is just one little campaign. So what I've tried to do is I've kind of gone through the reasoning why it's so important to change your bank account. You know, the differences between a building society and a high street bank. And you know, it's not all, the high street banks, they are under pressure because of their shareholders. But now, I just wondered if any of you have any questions.
Just to bring one last little thought. In our Catholic understanding of what is a sin, what makes a sin, for example, when we're preparing children to receive their first communion, the basic conditions that make something a sin, rather than just a sort of mistake or something, is that it's something that is done, something that is harmful to others or to ourselves, which is done in full knowledge and full freedom. Full freedom, so no one's forcing us to do it. And full knowledge means that we understand exactly that it is a bad thing that we are doing. Okay. So for me, when Rafaela shared this information earlier in the year, it kind of opened my eyes, and it made me realize that I had been doing something very harmful with the way that I was using my money. So I banked with Lloyds, and I believed all of those images of those black stallions galloping across green fields. For decades, I've been seduced by that image, thinking, what a wonderful company. But when you understand, so when you actually know, when you see the facts, we then have to make a change, because you can't just continue with the status quo once you know that something is wrong, something that you are doing is harmful. And you think about it, every single time we take out our cards, because we live in an increasingly cashless society, so we use our cards more and more and more and more. Every time we make a transaction, the bank that we bank with is receiving a fee for that transaction. So when we think about our carbon footprint, we naturally think, or we should be thinking, every journey we're going to make, what is the best decision for this journey? You know, if I can walk, if I can cycle, I do. If I can go on the train rather than a car, I do, etc., etc., etc. The things that we buy, the food that we eat, all of those things, all of those are a conscious decision that we should be making. We should be analysing, we should be reflecting on how we live our lifestyle now. And that absolutely includes the money, the way that we use our money. And as you said, Rafaela, it is, you know, it's a wonderfully freeing thing when you're buying that drink in the pub, for example, a great example for a priest, and you can sort of bring out your nationwide card and say, yes. You know, there's like guilt-free public spending. It's fantastic. So, Rafaela, just thank you for what you shared with us, and all of the work that's gone into that, and all the money, and all of the different ways in which you have been getting lots of people to think about this. So thank you very much, and we hope that through everyone who's here today, and through those who'll be watching this on the edited version, this will make a lot of people really, really, really think very, very fundamentally about their relationship with money and the bank that they use and choose. So thank you very much.